Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to Geeks Not Nerds, the podcast. I'm Captain Logan.
And I am Vince.
Vince!
Yes.
Today we're going to talk once again about criticism.
Ooh. I don't think we've done that in at least a few weeks.
At least a few days. Today we're going to talk about critics, specifically. And we've tackled topics along these lines before, but this is very specific. Today I want to talk about what critics feel like their job description is, basically. I want to talk about the objectivism we kind of feel like critics ought to have versus whether or not they actually exemplify that.
Mm-hmm. You know, some people, excuse me, at least a lot of people that I run into who either make movies or make movies that or make movies part of their life, so they don't actually make movies, but they feel that they're important. But a lot of people that I run into...
The people I know who make movies read criticisms of them and they cry.
Well, you know, that's not wrong. I mean, the crying's a little exaggerated, but there's a lot of my friends that go out there and they love movies. They go to see a movie every week, and then they come back to me and they're like, Vince, I thought it was a solid flick. And then they read the criticism and they're like, I hate critics.
Yeah.
Like, critics just ruin movies for me. And, you know, some of my friends I think are half-wits, because they say a critic ruined a movie for me because he pointed out his flaws in the movie and now I see them and now I don't enjoy it as much as I do. And then we have people that have a valid point who say that like that guy just land-blasted that movie for no apparent reason. Like it wasn't so much that he was saying that there are problems with it, he was just saying that it was crap. And so why does a critic do this? I mean, I suppose that's the question of the day, but that's the logic that leads up to it, because we have an audience that has an opinion, that has the ability to make an opinion, whether it be informed or not. And so how does a critic really fit into that? What does a critic bring to a movie that's not what the average Joe can bring to a movie?
Yeah, let me start from this place, Vince. That brings us to a really good starting place. What would you say a critic's background ought to be?
I think a critic should have a number of different backgrounds that lead up to him being a critic. I think that a critic needs to be able to understand narrative, he needs to be able to understand character, and he needs to be able to understand, sound. He needs to understand music, he needs to understand acting. A critic needs to be what a director can be.
Wow, really? You think that?
I think so. I think that because
then I'm going to stop calling myself a critic, pal.
I think at least in the ability to notice things and expectations-wise, I think a critic should be able to say, this is what needs to happen in this scene in order for it to optimize its efficiency. And that's what a director essentially does.
Yeah, sure. I personally, and this is just me, I would amend that to say that a critic needs to have a good understanding of what works in a movie in regards to how it pertains to an audience. Like is it working in entertaining an audience, or alternatively, is it trying to do something else for or to an audience, and then is it achieving that? What I mean is, I don't think a critic necessarily has to have acted in or directed movies or worked on a movie in order to be a critic. I don't think they have to understand every nuance about how movies are made, but I think they need to understand what makes movies, and specifically what makes good stories work, successful. Like what's making a story successful, and is this movie achieving that? Because I think that there are a lot of obviously there are a lot of different ways to tell stories. There are a lot of different kinds of movies that get made. And keep in mind that the same critics that are reviewing narrative films are also reviewing every other kind of film too. They're reviewing documentaries and stuff too. So it's about is this movie successful in what it's setting out to do? And so if you don't have an understanding of that, then I think that you're going to be in danger of writing a review that says, did this movie speak to me? And if it didn't, it's bad. But you're one person.
Yeah.
So you have to look at it in mass, and you have to say, intent really does have something to play into this. So you really have to say, what's it trying to do? Is it achieving that? Was that worth doing in the first place? And for an audience, what do I think that this would be successful?
You know, essentially that's what I was trying to get at.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Well, no, that's right. I think that I think that a critic needs to be able to say, does it work? And how do I make this work? Because you can write a good movie and make a bad movie with it, just because the interpretation of the script got it into a point that it just wasn't told well.
And you've got to be objective enough, and I feel like people do this. This is an extreme example, but I feel like people, to a point, do this. They take the movie that they think is the most successful movie at all time, and they compare everything to that. You can't do that.
You know, I once knew a guy that asked me what the bar was for a good movie. He's like, what movie do you set as the peak movie that everything needs to be compared to?
You can't do it.
And I said, you don't do that. What you do is you judge a movie based on its own merits. You sit down and you watch the movie, and then you say to yourself, well, in that scene, why didn't it work, or why did it work?
Criticism for me is like ethics. This is how I look at ethics. Nearly every kind, and I'm not going to get into how I feel about certain kinds of morality, but when I try to make a judgment call on is this decision right or is this decision wrong, it's not based on precedent. It's based on the specific situation. With all the understanding I have of what led up to this, is what decisions should be made. Exactly the same thing with film criticism. You take it on a case-by-case basis. So one movie might be doing on the surface, all the same stuff that this other movie is doing. But one's good and one's bad.
Right.
That can happen.
Well, you know, we're talking about...
Case-by-case basis.
We're not so much talking about a character's decisions, although if we're talking about bad writing, then a character's decision.
I'm talking about a director's decision.
Yeah, we're talking about the filmmaker's decisions. See, we're talking about forcing things into this movie that don't necessarily need to be there. So
yeah, and just all the stuff that makes for good narrative on screen because it's a visual medium. You know, is it a cohesive piece? Who are the characters? What are they doing? Do the characters fall behind the wayside because we're focused on something else, even though it's supposed to be a story? How well is it paced? Etc. Etc. All the stuff that we always talk about with movies.
Right. So where does a critic fit into this? A critic needs to be able to point those things out, but I feel like, to some extent, I feel like critics think of themselves as the pop culture police, and that's not necessarily. I do think we need.
Oh, I see myself as the pop culture police. Man, no, I'm kidding.
I think what critics essentially should do is expect movies to live up to what they can be, and to say, here's the problems with it, here's the virtues of it, and now this is how it culminates in a whole as to whether or not it's worth seeing. And I think that sometimes, and Cap and I were talking about this before we were getting started here, but I think that sometimes critics will just blast a movie because it doesn't live up to the expectations that they have. So if they're doing that, then what's the point of being a critic? You're just a regular viewer at that point who has the ability to write a paper about it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, honestly, sometimes I would make the case that critics have their minds made up about a movie before they see it. And then the way they approach it, and we're not going to name names or anything. So you know, this is somewhat generalized, but I think a lot of people who read a lot of criticism will know what I mean when I say this. I think a lot of critics will go, well, I don't like this director, or I don't like this studio, or I don't like this topic, or I don't like this genre of film, and so I've already maybe I decided it's too lowbrow, I must hate it, or whatever it is, and then I go see it. And I didn't go see it with my mind open enough to where if it actually did exceed my expectations, I could change my mind. I went to it so that I would have examples of the things I'd already decided about it to then put into a paper. I really think people do this. And so then you go to the movie and then you look at it with blinders on and you go, that fuels my point, that fuels my point, that fuels my point, and you half wrote your paper before you even saw the thing.
Yeah, one of the things that they... I took a speech class, as well as anybody who's gone to college has probably taken a speech class. And one of the things that they always told us is when you go to a speech, listen to the person. Listen to what they have to say, and then ask questions afterward. And I'm going to tell you what, you cannot... I'm going to tell you what, wow, that was country.
I'm going to tell you what.
You better listen, boy. But, so the thing about it is that...
you don't even have that hat on.
I'm wearing a cabbie hat at the time.
Sorry, guys.
But my country background jumping out of me kind of surprised me and threw me off point. I forgot what I was saying.
I'm sorry.
But
what were you saying?
Anyway, moving on. You see, we're not even on train tracks, but we did manage to derail.
But do you think that critics are that there are critics who do this, who like make their minds up before they go? Some critics. Some critics even get the reputation, whether they do this or not, of writing reviews of things without seeing them. That happens all the time. You know, not that. I mean, I don't know. I can't. I can't throw that judgment out. What I mean is, I hear people being criticized for that all the time. Well, I can't tell by reading your review if you even saw it because you weren't specific enough.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's one of the things that the guy from the Chicago Tribune... Wait, Chicago Sun-Times is Ebert, right?
Yeah.
And the guy from the Chicago Tribune said, I saw him give a speech, and he said, give examples. He says, do not make... The two big things that he wanted us to take away from that speech were do not make your critique or your criticism a summary, because that's useless.
Right.
But the other thing he said was that don't make claims without being able to support them. Mm-hmm. So if you cannot give examples from a movie...
Which is, by the way, paper writing 101.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of people think that when they write a critique, it's got to be strictly opinion or it's got to be strictly summary. It should be common knowledge that you have to support a claim. You can't just say, well, I thought the cinematography was bad. Well, why?
And it needs to be objective. You can't just have, I know I said this already kind of, but you can't just have this blanket idea of what all film should be and then go with that. I've said this before, but I have had viewers who have ragged on me for talking too much about intent in movies when I've reviewed things, where they've said, well, intent isn't everything. And that's true to a point, and I agree with that. But it is important. You can't go to a kid's movie and say, well, this is bad simply because it's too childish and it wasn't fun for me. Yeah, but it wasn't made for you.
Right.
You know what I mean? Now you could say it's too dumbed down even for children. That's a fair claim. You know, you could say, look, just because it's a movie for 6-year-olds doesn't mean that it has to be watered down garbage. You know,
right.
we can make good, fun, you know, animated films or even live action films for kids that also teaches them something or is just above their head enough that if they liked it, they'll grab over their head and learn something. You know what I mean? I've always been a proponent of let's use word choice that's just above kids' heads. Just above.
Right.
You know what I mean? At least some. You know what I mean? A few vocabulary words here and there that they might understand in the context of a sentence, but they didn't know before they walked into a movie, because it then teaches them what those words are.
Yeah.
See, then they know them. So they walk out a little smarter than they were when they walked in. Instead of what happens more often, which is we've got to use, we don't want to turn any parents off because their kids didn't understand this movie. So we use, this really watered down language where we can't go over a certain syllable count, that kind of thing.
It's the concept of marketing to the lowest common denominator.
That's right.
It's trying to get you guys...
Thank you, that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, in a nutshell, take a class called lowest common denominator and you're going to find... that
you're in a math class. No.
I was fishing for a joke, and I think you finished it for me. But, so what was it? You gave a good example about 2 movies earlier.
Yeah,
before
okay.
we started recording.
Let's get into it. And before I get into those 2 movies, let me say this, Vince.
Coincidentally, I've not seen either of the movies.
The sad part about being a movie critic is that there are, especially these days, is that there are a lot of novice ones. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of us doing this that don't get paid for it, and then there are people who watch and listen to some of us that don't get paid for it. And then there are the select few who do get paid for it, and that's a very small amount of people who actually do movie criticism. Mm-hmm. And there's not a lot of money in it, and so the people who are doing that are trying to keep jobs, they're trying to survive, and they want their... and I think most of them, or at least a lot of them, that's probably not all they do. They probably have a day job also. And because, as everybody knows, there's not as much money even now than there used to be in journalism. And even back before the internet, it was hard to make a lot of money as a film critic. Most film critics are not Roger Ebert.
Right.
He got lucky. And he also happens to be very good at what he does. So, in my humble opinion. So... The problem is that being a critic, in some ways, is a little bit like being a politician. You got to get your name out there, and sometimes getting your name out there and being objective are not mutually exclusive. And so what ends up happening is critics will do sometimes whatever they think they have to be sensationalist and get people to see them and to hear of them. That's why there were a few critics who got really dogged on by fans back when Dark Knight came out, because most critics really liked Dark Knight, and then you had the couple who were like, no, this is terrible, what are you talking about? And if they had clear and rational reasons for saying that, we understand, but some of them very much seem to just be saying that because nobody else was, and it would get them noticed.
Right.
Well, that's dishonest. And that's not in the job description.
It's not entirely unlike writing a novel with the intent of being controversial.
That's right, yeah.
Like, I'm going to write something with graphic sex and violence in it. Why? Because people are going to think I'm a horrible human being, and they're going to protest me, and then people are going to read my book because they want to know what's so bad about it.
I used to really pay attention to Rotten Tomatoes, and I'm starting to think that I'm going to start taking a lot less stock in Rotten Tomatoes, because usually the percentages, without even necessarily reading a lot of the articles, but I do. I don't just look at the percentages. I'll go in and read a sample of the good and the bad to get a sense of what the consensus in the critics is, and I enjoy doing that. I'm getting to the point where I'm feeling like I'm going to take a lot less stock in that, because two movies came out, one I liked and one I disliked, that both had percentages so low you would assume the movies must be the worst thing you've ever seen, and they're not. Green Lantern, 26% on Rotten Tomatoes. Mm-hmm. I saw Green Lantern, and I didn't care for it, but it wasn't offensive. I mean, really 26%, really, in my mind, and has been before, is a low enough score that a bunch of people walked out. Generally speaking. When I say offensive, I mean offensive in the sense that it wasn't entertaining enough to continue watching it. Do you see what I'm saying? Like you've seen movies that are offensive in this, not necessarily offensive to your sensibilities, but offensive in the sense that, God, this is not fun to watch at all. I don't want to continue watching this. I'm going to turn it off, or I'm going to leave.
Well, let's call it off-putting if we're going to call it that. I mean, something that's going to make you not want to watch it anymore.
That's right. And Green Lantern, again, I didn't love it, but it was just more of the same. It was bad in the sense that I felt like I'd been here before. Not in the sense that it was just the most god-awful thing I'd ever seen. I mean, don't hold me to this when I eventually do a rewind on it, because, things change over time, and, I've only seen it a couple times, and I haven't, looked at it real, through a lens yet. But, right now I'd say probably a 2 out of 4 is probably what it was. It was middle of the road is what it was. And middle of the road, I can see 40%, but I can't see 26. That's crazy.
That's the thing about, I think, I have this feeling about Ryan Reynolds, and I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me when I say this, but I think Ryan Reynolds has a certain style to him that he can do other things, but people really want him to be what he is.
Right.
So he's going to be cast in parts and said, be Ryan Reynolds. And they're like, okay, well, I'm an actor. I'll be whoever I need to be. And they're like, no. Be Van Wilder. Like Jim Carrey, be Ace Ventura.
Yeah, that's right.
And, as Jim Carrey has gone, his career has evolved, and he's become a different person, essentially, within cinema, although he can go back and do Yes Man and things like that. But I think that people will start to expect certain things, and then they get it, and then they don't like it, if that makes any sense.
Well, yeah, but it's a fair enough criticism to say, and it was the same thing with Seth Rogen and Green Hornet, right?
Yeah.
I guess the green characters get these actors where we see them do one thing. But the same thing happened with Seth Rogen, where it was like, well, you're just kind of Seth Rogen, and I think that it's a fair criticism to say that these previously established characters, if you're gonna hire an actor who's just doing themselves, that person needs to be 100% that character.
Yeah.
And so a fair criticism would be, well, Ryan Reynolds just isn't Green Lantern to me. He's just not Hal Jordan to me. Thus, you've got a lot of fans arguing back and forth about whether or not Hal Jordan was ever supposed to be a humorous or joking character.
Yeah, I mean, and then Ryan Reynolds cast as Deadpool. Okay,
makes sense.
We get it.
Sure.
I mean, Jack Black cast as the Green Lantern. What? Why would you do that? Okay, he lost 100 pounds. Why would you do that? Still, because of the way the man is.
We have seen
or at least his persona.
We have seen actors where we can say, oh God, that actor is just that person. You know what I mean? Arnold Schwarzenegger is Conan.
Yeah, well, Arnold Schwarzenegger rarely plays a different character.
Maybe not so much with his accent, but I'm just saying, you build that guy up enough, he looks like Conan. So I'm just saying that, like, I can see, maybe that's a bad example, but just the first thing that popped in my head.
He's a great talk show host.
First thing that popped in my head, we made that joke recently. But you know what I'm saying? Like we've seen actors before where they just fit into that You know, and that actor was born to play that character, and if they're born to play it, that means they don't have to do much other than what they're already doing. But is that true with Ryan Reynolds and Green Lantern? Mm-hmm. But that doesn't make it a 26% movie.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose it's unfair for me to say what I just said about because the expectation is clearly from the audience, and then the critics judge it.
Yeah.
So, it's fair to call that a flaw. It's fair to, and of course I haven't seen the movie, so I don't actually know what I'm talking about. I'm just conjecturing here. But the critics need to be approaching it from not the police. I'm the pop culture police.
Yeah.
And they need to approach it from what works and what doesn't. So if they walk out there and say, well, I didn't like this movie because it fits the formula, so?
Well, but that can be a fair enough criticism, too. I guess what I'm saying is there's the difference between it's trash and it's mediocre.
That's what I'm saying. There's a difference between saying this is old hat and saying this is straight up bad.
Yeah.
Because you go to some movie, like, I'm going to say 300. That's mediocre to me. Like, cool, it had a really good visual style, but people got stabbed, people died, and then the movie was over.
Yeah.
And pretty much that's what it was. There was a lot of cool stuff happening, but not much of substance. And by the end of that movie, that got a 60% on Rotten Tomatoes, so that's neither here nor there. But by the end of that movie, if I were a critic, I would say, well, here's the problems, but ultimately it's going to be a satisfying experience.
Well, here's my other example, and this one floors me more than Green Lantern. Cars 2 is currently sitting at 33% on Rotten Tomatoes. Now, it was at 36 the other day, and it dropped some more. If Cars 2, or a movie like Cars 2, because it's a sequel, but if Cars 2 had been made by DreamWorks, it would be over 50%. Because critics expect Pixar to create the second coming of Christ every year. Mm-hmm. Because Pixar has this huge reputation for making brilliant movies. And how dare critics tell them that they can't make just a fun movie every now and again, is what I think. I don't think they have to make brilliant, genius freaking movies every year. Because if that's what they always set out to do, if they go, we're going to make a movie that changed hearts and minds every time, you know they're going to get preachier and preachier. It's, what Pixar does, this is what these guys do, and they say this all the time. They sit down and they say, what would we like to see? And they make, they make fun movies. And a lot of times when they have good messages and that sort of stuff, it's because it comes from the backgrounds of the people making the movie. Now, it's not that Cars 2 has no message. It's just not as deep in, it's not as deep-rooted of a message as some of the others have been. It's, right. And frankly, I was kind of impressed with the fact that it did have a little bit of the environmental thing that we've been seeing a lot lately, but it wasn't overly preachy about it, and it kind of showed both sides of it, too, which I really appreciated. Vince is just a super fun movie, and I don't know what's wrong with that.
Let me ask.
I really think that a lot of these critics were saying, let's trash Pixar. They finally made something that wasn't so genius, I had nothing bad to say about it, so now it's awful.
I think that critics sometimes think that their opinion is infallible, or our opinions are infallible, but I think that critics so much of the time, unfortunately, are subject to the same follies of the regular audience member. And I think that a lot of people put a lot of trust in these people, that a lot of people put a lot of trust in critics, thinking that they have the ultimate opinion, or that they have these chops, and that they're not going to be folly to just disliking something for the sake of disliking it in reference to other movies. Man. See, now that you've said that bothers me.
A lot of these reviews I said that were super negative on Cars 2 started with a phrase somewhere around this. More than one of them said something like, Cars 2 is a sequel to a movie that nobody wanted to see a sequel to. That doesn't make it bad.
Well, you're right, but
just because what's that?
So you're right about that. It doesn't make it bad, but when I heard that they were making Cars 2, my first response was, why?
But it doesn't matter, because here's the thing, okay? And again, some people might say, well, Captain Logan, you're a Pixar fanboy. You love Pixar, and so you trust them no matter what they do. To a point, I do kind of trust them no matter what they do. Well, not no matter what they do, but what I'm saying is, every time they've made a movie that I was like, why did they make that? I've liked it. And Cars 2 was exactly the same way. I didn't go into that thinking it was going to be an amazing movie, but it hit me in all the right places, and even if it hadn't, it's not a bad movie. Even if you didn't, you know what I mean? Like, here's the thing. And understand this and take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, because I'm one of the few people that really, really, really liked Cars. A lot of people don't like that movie, and we're going to do a Pixar podcast pretty soon, so I'll elaborate more on this. But a lot of people say Cars is the bottom of the barrel for Pixar. For me, it's in the top 4, maybe top 3, and I'm unusual for that reason. But it hit me in certain places that it didn't hit other people. So, and again, I'll get into that later. But you got to understand that it hit me in a couple places. You know what I mean? There's some sensibilities of mine that it was right there with Cars 2. Didn't do that because it's not it doesn't have any kind of tearjerker moments like I felt like the first Cars had in a place that I'll talk about later, but it was super fun, and I was extremely impressed that Mater was not irritating, and people are saying that he is, I think just because they thought he would be. But I mean, like, I liked him, and the thing is, it's kind of his movie. He's kind of the protagonist, and I was like, oh no, I don't want to see Larry the Cable Guy as the protagonist. I went in thinking that, and I left liking it. Do you see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And so I don't think it's fair. And even if you didn't like that, I don't think it's fair for people to dog on it as hard as they're dogging on it. And like I said, if it was made by a different studio, they wouldn't be.
Sometimes I'm going to say this, and then I'm just going to let it stand. I wonder if people don't have a little South hate. You know what I mean? Hate people, I don't really mean that they hate Southerners. I mean, people think that you cannot be worthy of being considered at least high class or a good movie if you're about a Southern person.
Yeah, but I think it's also because maybe they're offended because Major's a bit of a stereotype.
You see, that's what I'm kind of saying. He's using Southern stereotypes do exist.
Sure.
And of course, Larry the Cable Guy his name's not even Larry, and he really doesn't talk that way. He's imitating guys that he knew from Georgia. So the guys from Nebraska. He's not the same dude that you see on stage. Although, they do call him a redneck, and, certainly he probably is. Whatever.
Mitch, we're running out of time, and I want to do ranch. What's your final thoughts on this?
Well,
while I eat my orange slices.
I think that we need to put enough stock in critics, but I think that critics are putting too much stock in themselves. And I think that critics will I think that maybe people are saying, I'm a critic, so therefore it has to be highbrow. And what they're looking at, if it doesn't fit what they consider to be highbrow, then it's not artsy, and then they're doing exactly what John Lovitz made fun of in The Critic, saying, I like French films, pretentious, boring French films.
I love that show.
So, it is a good show. But, so, in my mind, when critics do stuff like that, that's essentially what they're doing, is saying, I'm better than you.
I'm gonna end this off by saying, do your job. Whatever your job is, do your job.
If you're mining coal, do that.
Do what's in your job description. If I'm reviewing movies and I don't particularly like horror films, but I come to terms to where I can understand horror films, and I go see a horror film that is particularly working on all levels of good horror films, it doesn't matter that I don't like that genre. Mm-hmm. I'm going to give it a positive rating. I'm going to recommend that people who like that see it. Mm-hmm. So just because I don't like superhero movies doesn't mean that Green Lantern is bad. Mm-hmm. Do you see what I'm saying? Although, I mean, that's not fair because it's not great. but you see what I'm saying. And also, don't try to hobble the legs underneath something just because it's popular if its popularity is fair. Pixar deserves all the popularity they get because they make good quality entertainment. And so let's not try to stab them in the heart just because they made a movie that you didn't think was as genius as Toy Story.
I think the last 3 movies that they made were Up, Wall-E, and Toy Story 3, right?
Up, and well, yeah. Mm-hmm. See, I think that's right.
Those movies, I haven't seen Toy Story 3, unfortunately, but I am aware of the things that happen in it. But extremely preachy. Wall-E, although I really liked it.
Yeah, I really liked it too.
And I think that what they're doing is they're looking at movies that have these heart-wrenching, tear-jerking moments, and then wanting
they have to have that.
Yeah,
but I don't think that's fair. I don't think it's fair to say that a movie is bad because the studio isn't doing what they always do with it.
Yeah, so that's
all I'm saying.
That's a lot like typecasting too.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah. See, so
you can see
where I'm coming from. I mean, I think you would have to see Cars 2 to see if you agree with what I'm talking about. But I'm predicting that if you saw it, you wouldn't like it as much as me, but you would go, that's not a 26% movie or a 33% movie.
Yeah. Although I have liked some 33% movies before.
Sure. Yeah. You want to do rants real quick?
Yeah.
All right, go ahead.
So I've been watching some stand-up lately, and there's something that really annoys me. Directors who think they're going to get artsy and shove the camera into the stand-up comic's face. That really annoys me. Because, like, for example, I was watching something called, I think it was called, well, it's about the comedians of comedy. The comedians of comedy made another special that was just them doing stand-up, and it wasn't the one with the documentary. And they shoved the camera right up in Maria Bamford's face when she was doing an impression. Like, every time she went to this impression, they got a real close-up on her face. Yeah, now, she does do stuff with her face. Now, I can, she embodies the character within her face, but she also embodies the character with her body. It's, the word body is in the word embody. And if you're doing an impression...
They're the same word.
This is true. So, if you're doing an impression, then you're not just changing your voice. I mean, for example... I'm not a big fan of comedy CDs. I prefer a comedy DVD because I think that the video is superior to the audio. Why? Because what stand-up comedians do is not just vocal.
Well, isn't it irritating when you're listening to a CD of a stand-up comic and then suddenly the audience is laughing and you don't get what they're laughing at because you can't see what the stand-up comic is doing?
Exactly. I mean, there's this guy named Pablo Francisco, and I don't know if anybody's... I don't know if you've heard of him or not. But,
I've heard of him, but only from you, I think. I don't know.
See, Pablo Francisco, I watched his Comedy Central Presents. Hilarious. I listened to a CD that I bought. Not really funny to me. Why? Because it's not just his voice that makes things funny. It's his physicality that makes things funny. Granted, to be fair, his content wasn't quite as good in the CD as it was on the special. But that's the thing, is that when a director takes something, we should be seeing all of this. We should be seeing the character, the stand-up comedian's entire physicality, and they're shoving it into their face and ignoring everything that the comedian really has to bring. That really bothers me, because it's almost like the director is saying, I know better than the comedian does. This comedian's craft is not highly important to me. Now, I think that what a director needs to do is heighten the comedian's abilities. For example, Chris Rock, he paces around the stage an abnormal amount for a comedian. So what do? They make the camera follow him quite often. Mm-hmm. They'll get different angles so that they can get him on different parts of the stage. Now, if they don't do that, they're going to just miss him. Either they're going to have to get an entire stage shot, which would, of course, take away from the physicality of the comedian.
Because you do need to see his face up front sometimes.
Yeah, you need to know this nice middle ground. I think one of the best stand-up shows I'd ever seen was actually an off-Broadway, or no, I think it was actually on Broadway. Anyway, it's John Leguizamo's Freak, directed by Spike Lee. Spike Lee...
I'm an idiot. I didn't realize John Leguizamo did stand-up comedy.
They're more like one-man shows than they are stand-up. Although, what is a full hour-and-a-half stand-up show other than a one-man show?
Yeah, sure.
But,
except it's not necessarily acting. Or at least, well, it is, but it's not like a persona. Well... Might be. Okay.
You see,
okay, the more I say that, the more it does sound like a one-man show.
There's varying levels of potentials here. But, see, Spike Lee knew what he was doing. He let us see the guy dance. He let us see the guy's face when it was important. I mean, if a character's short, then you get an upper view. If a character's supposed to be tall, you get a lower view. A director needs to know where he is.
Because it's not the kind of thing you really think about that much. Mm-hmm. Directing a stage show of just a guy talking. Mm-hmm. Like, it sounds like something that would just be super easy. Like, it doesn't sound like there's any craft at all to this. It's just like you turn on a camera and you go, but that's not what it is at all.
I mean, if you're having a 20-minute set, that's essentially what you should do. I mean, because that's what the comedians of comedy were doing. They're like 20, 30 minutes maybe. 15 minutes. These guys are getting up on stage and making their jokes, and the director is shoving the camera. Like he has a limited amount of things that he can do. I guess maybe he has a lesser budget. I don't really know. I'm just saying things here at this moment. But let's suppose that the guy doesn't have the abilities that Spike Lee had with his big show that he was doing with John Leguizamo. Mm-hmm. My point still stands, because why are you ignoring the things that the comedian is bringing? Why are you focusing on one thing? Well, maybe it's because he thinks that Maria Bamford's face is funnier than the rest of her. So, show it the way it needs to be shown. I mean, granted, need. That's a relative term, but anyway, I'm kind of going long, so...
Well, you talked about inappropriate camera angles, so I'm going to talk about inappropriate costuming. I'm going to talk about cosplaying that just doesn't make any sense. Inappropriate cosplaying. And I'm going to say this as delicately as I can say this, but when you're coming up with costumes for cosplay and you're the one that's going to wear the costume, I mean, sometimes you'll have people who will make brilliant, elaborate costumes for other people, And then that's awesome because they just give them to a person who it fits well in. But if you're the one who's going to wear the costume, make a costume that fits you, that makes sense. You know. And again, I'm being as delicate as I can with this, but I have seen people at conventions recently wearing costumes that were super elaborate, really awesome, beautiful looking costumes, but I didn't buy it. It was almost hard to look at because the person that wore it was the wrong shape.
Yeah, I mean, let's think of this as casting in a way.
Yeah,
I mean, you wouldn't want Larry Miller, this man who's extremely bald, to play Superman. How's he going to get the spit curl? How's he going to look the character's part? I mean,
sure, yeah. And this is maybe unfair because I'm a short, thin white guy with a beard. Okay, so there are a number of different things I could pull off if I really wanted to. I'm not a big cosplayer, but I mean, if I wanted to do something in comics, geeky stuff, and I didn't want to shave the beard, pretty much, I would have to get contacts and take my glasses off. But other than that, what could I do? I could do General Zod pretty easily. He was pretty short. He's got a beard. There's what else? I was thinking about some other things earlier, but I could do that. There's some things I could do, but I would make the case that for most body types, there is some cool character in pop culture that you could find and do an elaborate costume of and look good in. Because it fits your body type. And if you can't think of one and you're a great costumer, make a costume for somebody else. That's all I'm saying. I don't know if you agree with that. But
no, I do agree with that. I mean, for example, I saw an overweight guy who pulled off Bane pretty well.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, he just chose the clothing that would best accentuate the features that he had because he's kind of a muscular dude, but he's still overweight. So instead of choosing the Bane suit that has this super svelte cut to where you see everything,
right,
he chooses a tank top that covers up certain things that accentuate his muscular arms.
So you weren't thinking about the fact that he was a large guy. You just went, he looks like Bane.
You're like, wow, that's a really elaborate, cool mask. And look at the boots; they're really neat. I
guess you can do whatever you want to. I mean, if you I've always wanted to play this character, and I don't care that I'm bigger or smaller than them or whatever. Okay, cool, whatever. If you just really want to, but if you're trying to win a contest or something, certainly you probably should. Try to pick something that you really that you really fit in. And I don't know. I guess what I hate is watching somebody who put a lot of time and effort into something, and then they look super embarrassed. Does that make sense? I mean, because sometimes you'll have a crowd that will watch somebody like this, and you can tell that it's embarrassing for everyone there, and I feel bad for the person because they put a lot of time and effort into this.
It's kind of like saying, imagine you're cosplaying as the character from the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and you look like Chris Farley. Well, you should probably choose Meatloaf, because if you choose Rocky, that means you're just wearing a Speedo. That's a lot of skin that doesn't make you look much like the character.
Mm-hmm.
And now, maybe what I just said is incredibly cruel, but I would like to be Meatloaf. When I was big, if I was going to go to a Rocky Horror thing, I would be Meatloaf. Because, I just started identifying with certain characters.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that was by virtue of being big. Now, when I was big, I just chose things that I couldn't play. Like I'm not going to be Superman because I'm big. And I'm not going
to be Superman because I'm tiny.
This is true. You see,
but I might be Wolverine.
Yeah, well, he's a reasonably short guy in the comic books. So there was one time that I told you should be Daredevil because I thought that'd be really neat.
Daredevil, really?
Yeah.
He's kind of bigger than me, though.
Well, it depends on the depiction because I see a lot of lanky Daredevil.
Well, early Daredevil was very lanky, but most early Marvel was pretty lanky. Spider-Man was lanky.
That's
Captain America was pretty lanky.
These guys who have their extreme agility be part of their power, that's what they do.
This is neither here nor there, but what I loved about early Captain America was that he wasn't super bulked up because he just had super strength because that was the power he got from the serum, and he didn't have to bulk his arms up. He just was strong. I always kind of like that.
Yeah. I've been noticing that Captain America seems incredibly buff lately.
Everybody is now. Name a male character that's not. Besides Plastic Man.
I was about to say Plastic Man.
Well, thanks a lot for listening to Geeks Not Nerds, the podcast, and we'll have another podcast for you again next week. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Vince.